がここにいるうちの本物のスクールスポーツのために行こうぜベイビーバンこの国は気をつけて、現実になることがありますからね。
Alright, so we're going to go ahead and continue the long tradition of covering Japanese boxing here on True School Sports. It's the #1 source for Japanese boxing from an American, so shout out to you guys out there in Japan. I had a great time out there. But listen, this is an important video. This is a video that I really wanted to get to, and truth be told, this video may ruffle some feathers. It may piss some people off, but it's the truth, and it needs to be said because I feel like Kenshiro Teraji is not getting the credit he deserves. I feel like Kenshiro Teraji is not getting the proper appreciation for being one of the top fighters in Japan. And truth be told, I don't even think it's even a competition that Kenshiro is the second best fighter in Japan. I don't think Junto Nakatani has done enough to surpass Kenshiro. I don't think Kazuto Ioka is on the level of Kenshiro. And if you really want to have it right, the main idea of this video is this, is even the monster, Naoya Monster Inoue, if you want to really have it right, Kenshiro Teraji has been fighting better competition than Naoya Inoue over the last 5 years. He's fought better competition than Naoya Inoue over the last 5 years. He's fought better competition than Junto Nakatani over the last 5 years. And he's fought better competition than Kazuto Ioka over the last 5 years. And I'm just sick and tired of people not giving him his proper credit. He's not on any of the mainstream pound-for-pound lists, but he's been fighting at the World Championship level since 2017. He has the 5th or 6th most, I believe it's the 6th most world title defenses in his career amongst active fighters. He is truly a Hall of Famer, and he's got another great fight coming up in March, a true legacy-defining fight, a real Japanese legacy-defining fight. I would definitely say it's his 3rd Japanese legacy fight. Which, you know, if we're just being honest for a second, Naoya Inoue has boxed a lot of really good fighters. He hasn't been in one Japanese legacy fight, let alone 3 like Kenshiro. So let's talk about it. So over the last 5 years, Kenshiro has fought 9 times, which is very consistent. You look at what he's done since 2020 to right now. So we'll start from the top, from 2020 to right now. He didn't box in 2020 because of the pandemic. He didn't fight that year, but he started in 2021. So in 2021, he boxed Tetsuya Hida, who was a Japanese champion, so a decent fighter domestically. He was like 34-10, solid fighter. After that, he had the 2 fights with Masamichi Ibuki. He got knocked out in the first fight, right, which nobody expected. Ibuki upset him. But then he comes back in the rematch and he knocks out Ibuki in 3 rounds and just treated him like a piece of trash. And that win has aged so gracefully for Kenshiro because Ibuki has went on to become a world champion again, and he's on the cusp of unifying the light flyweight division. So that's not a small accomplishment, and he showed a lot to avenge that loss. He then came off the heels of that and had his thus far legacy-defining fight with Hiroto Kiyoguchi, who was at the time 16-0. The lineal Ring Magazine and WBA light flyweight champion, a fight that was looked at to be competitive and somewhat on the level. You know, some people would look at that as a 50-50 fight because both fighters were classed so highly, and Kenshiro wasn't that far removed from being knocked out. And he just schooled him. I mean, it was one of his easiest fights. So that was a great win for him. After that, he fought Anthony Olas Kuwaga, who came in on short notice. Olas Kuwaga gives Kenshiro hell. Kenshiro knocks Anthony Olas Kuwaga out the boxing ring. But then that win has aged well for him because now Olas Kuwaga has become a world champion at flyweight, and he's defended the belt against Jonathan Gonzalez, and he's about to defend it against Hiroto Kiyoguchi. And if he wins that fight, he's probably going to rematch Kenshiro. So that win's aged well. He fought Heki Butler from South Africa, who's been a champion multiple times. Beat him. He beat Carlos Canizales, who really probably should have been champion already. A lot of people thought that he beat Kenshiro. That was a close fight. And then after that, he fought... what's that guy? The guy from Thailand he just fought back in December, and he beat the brakes off of him, and they robbed him right there in Thailand. So he's really the uncrowned champion. And even if you don't think he won those fights, he's one of the most dangerous fighters in the light flyweight division, right? That's not an easy fight. First fight at flyweight, fights Christopher Rosales, the former champion, schools him, and now you're telling me Kenshiro is gonna in his second fight as a flyweight, he's going straight to Seigo Yuriokui. You know, Seigo Yuriokui, a fighter that is probably one of the most dangerous fighters in Japan. Come on, man. How can you sit here and say that Kenshiro, that these guys like Inoue and Junto Ioka are fighting better fighters than Kenshiro. Kenshiro literally has not had one whack opponent in 5 years. Not one. He hasn't had one whack opponent in 5 years. You could even say he hasn't even had one real, true soft touch in 5 years. And he's managed to find ways to win against all kinds of styles, against big punchers, volume punchers, back foot boxers, just all kinds of styles. And on top of that, he's actually fought, you know, other top Japanese fighters in and around his weights, which we can't say for Junto, and which we really can't say for Inoue. So that's just the truth. Kenshiro's resume is top notch. Good luck. Now, if you want to compare his resume to the Monster, because everybody's going to sit here and say, well, BT is hating on the Monster, which is not true. I love the Monster. The Monster is one of my favorite fighters. But Inoue, since 2020, from 2020 to now, Inoue has fought 10 times, which is amazing. He's been slightly more active than Kenshiro, which I think is awesome. But when you check under the hood and look at the guys he's been fighting, I mean, let's compare. So in 2020, he fought Jason Maloney in the bubble, knocked him out. Maloney went on to become champion against Vincent Astrolabio, outboxed him. Then he fights two soft touches. He fights Michael Dasmarinas, who really was just a high-level Asian fighter, quick punch a little bit, but nothing really like great at the world level. Then he cherry picks Aaron Dippian, a fight that was such a mismatch that Top Rank didn't even put the fight on in the United States because that's how big of a mismatch it was, right? Then he fights Donaire in the rematch, which I think is a great win, but I've heard a lot of people downplay that win and say that Donaire is old. They say the Donaire fight wasn't really that great in the rematch because he was older, right? So that's up for interpretation. I think it's a good win. Then he fights Paul Butler, who was a champion, but everyone knew that Paul Butler was a limited fighter, right? Then he comes and then he has a great 3-fight run. He beats Stephen Fowen, who was a pound-for-pound level fighter, who was the #1 guy at 122 at the time. Beat him with no tune-ups, so he got extra credit for that, right? Then he beats Marlon Tapales, who was a former 2-division champion. That's a great win. Louis Neri, former champion, beat up really good fighters like Shinsuke Yamanaka. Got dropped in that fight, but showed resilience and came back and stopped him, right? And then since then, he fought TJ Doheny, who is a little bit up there in age, but good fighter, former world champion. He was knocking out all kinds of Japanese fighters. And then he fought Yi Jun Kim, which really wasn't his fault because he was supposed to fight Sam Goodman. But even if he fought Sam Goodman does not measure up to guys like Sego Yuriokui and Kiyoguchi and Masamichi Ibuki. He does not measure up to those kind of fighters. So as great as the Monster is and as dominant as he's been, he has not fought on a consistent basis, at least. Because I would say Stephen Fowen is probably better than everyone Kenshiro has fought, in my opinion. But if we're looking at overall depth, overall strength of schedule, overall strength of competition, Kenshiro's resume over the last 5 years is greater than Inoue's. That's just the truth. You can choose to disagree with that if you want to, but it's just the truth. You're not going to sit here and tell me like Kenshiro never fought anybody like a Yi Jun Kim. No, with all respect to Yi Jun Kim, I give him his respect, but like Yi Jun Kim probably is not even I don't even think Yi Jun Kim, you would say he's an actual credible top 10 super bantamweight. So how can you say that, Inoue's resume is better than Kenshiro's over the last 5 years? I don't see it. Then you get to Junto Nakatani, right? Because Junto is someone that a lot of people are bigging up and they're saying that he's the guy to beat Inoue and that he is clearly the second best fighter in Japan. And I honestly could not disagree with anything more than that. I like Junto. I think he's very good. I think he's a top shelf fighter. Let's talk about him. So he's had 9 fights in the last 5 years, just like Kenshiro. So the same amount of fights. You start from the top. He beat GML Magramo, right? Magramo's a solid fighter, former WBO Oriental champ, but never really cracked it at the world level. Beat him. He beat Angel Acosta, the former light flyweight champion, at flyweight. Acosta, a little bit undersized for flyweight, but, a good fighter. Then he fought Ryota Yamaguchi, who was WBO Asia Pacific champion. Good domestic level fighter, right? Solid. Francisco Rodriguez Jr., former champ, at the end of his career. Andrew Maloney, the lesser of the Maloney's, right? Beat him, and that was really the knockout that put him on the map. But he's not as good as Jason, right? RG Cortez, decent fighter, but never won anything. Then he became champion at bantamweight when he beat Santiago, Alex Santiago, you know, who had just beaten Donaire, or what's left of Donaire at this point, right? Probably at that time, I would say Santiago was the weakest champion in the division, but a good fighter. You know, he did win the belt, so you give him his credit. Then he beat Vincent Astrolabio, who, again, another high-level fighter at the Asian level, but when he fought at the world level against Jason Maloney, he got found out and lost and got outboxed. So, dangerous fighter, dangerous Filipino puncher, but limited at the world level. And then in his last fight, he fought Tasana Salapat from Thailand, who had an extremely padded 76-1 record and stopped him in 6 rounds. That's Junto Nakatani's body of work over the last 5 years. That's not hype. That's not me hating. That's his body of work. And there's some good fight, like there's some good fighters he beat in there, but his strength of competition over the last 5 years is significantly weaker than what Kenshiro has been fighting. And then, just for good measure, right? Just for good measure, let's talk about Kazuto Ioka, because a lot of people like to say that Kazuto Ioka is better than Kenshiro, which I think is absolutely laughable. It's laughable to even put Kazuto Ioka on the same level as Kenshiro, because Kazuto Ioka, first and foremost, he hasn't really done much since 2020. He's had 7 fights in the last 5 years, which is the least out of all these guys I'm talking about in this video. And his last great win was 5 years ago, and it was against Kosai Tanaka on New Year's Eve of 2020, a fight that, you know, a lot of people thought was 50-50. I thought Tanaka was going to beat Kazuto Ioka, honestly, because he had that kind of momentum. And Tanaka was an undefeated 3-division world champion, you know, and then he even went on to become a 4-division world champion, right? An amazing fighter. So I give him credit for that. That was probably the signature fight of his career, in my opinion. He beat Francisco Rodriguez Jr., again, a former champion, probably towards the end of his little towards the end of his career, but a good fighter. Then he beat Ryoji Fukunaga, who was a Japanese champion at super flyweight, good domestic fighter, but never really won anything at the world level. Donny Nietes beat him in a rematch because he lost to Nietes years earlier. And you know, Nietes is a good fighter. He's been champion plenty of times. So that's a good win. And then the 2 fights after that, to me, with Ioka, are the most damning fights for him when you're comparing him to a guy like Kenshiro, because he fought Joshua Franco, who's a good fighter at the world level, but he's not no A-level fighter. He's not Kiyoguchi. He's not Seigo Yuriakui. He's not, you know, he's not Stephen Fulton. He's not those guys that the other guys been fighting and beating, right? And he actually drew with Joshua Franco. And a lot of people thought he lost to Joshua Franco. So much so to the point that he had to do a rematch with Joshua Franco, right? And then he won the rematch, so good on him for that. But that right there kind of showed you his level. Then he cherry-picked Jasper Perez, right, on New Year's Eve of 2023, I think. And then in his last fight against Fernando Puma Martinez, he lost. So Ioka has done some great things. He's Japan's first ever 4-division champion. But I think people like to overrate Kazuto Ioka. I think he's actually one of the more overrated fighters from Japan, because I've heard people say that he's the best fighter in Japan besides Inoue, and I don't agree with that. I think Kenshiro has a better body of work than him. Kenshiro is a more dominant fighter than him, and the body of work just proves that. The body of work and who he's been fighting proves that.
Kenshiro Teraji.
So in conclusion, right? In conclusion, because this is a video that had to be made because people don't know what they're talking about. Kenshiro Teraji has been challenging himself more than anybody in Japan, including the monster Inoue, over the last 5 years. He's fought more punchers than all these guys. You look at just look at the guys he's fought over the last 5 years. Look at all the punches he's fighting. Masamichi Ibuki, right? Ibuki, if you ask anybody who's fought him, they normally tell you Ibuki is the hardest puncher they fought. And it doesn't matter who it is. You ask Seigo that question. You ask Kenshiro that question. They all say it's Ibuki, right? Probably one of the most heavy-handed fighters in the history of Japanese boxing, right? Puncher. Hirota Kiyoguchi, accumulation puncher. Anthony Olascuaga, puncher. Carlos Canizales, puncher. Seigo Yuriokui, puncher. More than half the guys he's fought over the last 5 years, you could classify as real deal, like either above average or elite punchers. You can't say the same for Inoue. Stephen Fowen, who's his best win, is not a puncher. Louis Neri is a decent puncher as a super bantamweight, but he's not the same puncher that he was at bantamweight. Doheny, big time puncher, right? He's probably fought, I would say, 3, maybe you could say 4 punches. I'll say Yi Jun Kim is a punch, but Yi Jun Kim doesn't have the know-how to land those punches, so I really say it's 3. He hasn't really fought the amount of punches over the last 5 years that Kenshiro has. Junto Nakatani definitely has not fought a level of punchers that Kenshiro has fought. The biggest puncher Junto fought over the last 5 years, I'd probably say would be maybe maybe Vincent Astrolabio, or maybe like Magramo. And those guys don't have the know-how. They're not really they don't have the elite skill to land those kind of punches on a guy like Junto, right? So he's probably fought maybe 2, possibly 3 punchers, and that might even be me being generous, right? So he's been matched very well. Side note with Junto, because I forgot to say this. Junto has already defeated. Junto beat Masamichi Ibuki early in his career in 2016. He beat him in a 4-rounder, and then he knocked out Seigo Yuriokui in a 6-rounder in 2017. So he's beat some of these guys that Kenshiro has fought or is fighting, but that was a different stage of their careers, and those guys developed and got a lot better. So it wasn't like he beat the prime version of those guys, but he did beat them, so he gets credit for that. And then as far as Ioka, the biggest puncher he probably fought over the last 5 years, I would say, is Puma Martinez, and he lost to him. So you're talking about Kenshiro fighting the most depth out of everybody at the top level of Japan, the most toughest opposition in Japan, and the most dangerous opposition because he's fighting the most guys who really have punch power, who can really knock you out. So, you know, that's my take. I'm standing on it. I don't care who's offended by it. You can be offended by it as much as you want. It's just the truth. It's just the truth. So I'll leave it at that. You know, that's a conviction I will stand on when it comes to Japanese boxing, is that Kenshiro at this moment in time, on this fine day of February 6th, 2:05 Pacific time, PM, he has fought better competition over the last 5 years than Inoue, than Junto Nakatani, and Kazuto Ioka, which means in conclusion that nobody has represented Japanese boxing better than Kenshiro over the last 5 years. Except, you know, you could say Inoue, because Inoue is a bigger star and he's gonna cross over to the States. But if we're just talking about what they're doing in the ring, Kenshiro was the guy that's challenging himself the most. And look, he's still challenging himself. He's going to fight Seigo Yuriokui at the peak of his powers in his second fight as an undersized flyweight, you know? And it's a fight he could very well lose. So you got to take your hat off to him. He's a future Hall of Famer. And the fact that he's not on the pound-for-pound list should be a federal crime against boxing, honestly. He's not only is he in the pound-for-pound top 10, but he's probably should be around the 7 or 8 range, to be honest with you. But you guys leave your comments down below. Make sure you guys take the time to subscribe. And like I say in every single one of these videos, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Dang. So until next time, take care. Thank you for watching another video on the untouchable True School Sports Empire. For more great boxing content just like this, make sure you click right over here.